Earlier today on my YouTube channel, I did a video about a young girl by the name of Imani McCray who committed suicide recently in the state of New Jersey. Unfortunately, it's a very unfortunate event that happened to this young girl. I mean, she was only 8 years old and she was about to turn 9, and she was sent to her room for a timeout by her parents, and then when they went in there, they found that their daughter was dead. They're still doing some investigations because they don't know exactly what led to her actually committing suicide. I mean, no one really knows what would drive a child to commit suicide. And one of the people that left the comments, I'm not going to say their name, but they left a comment that I know echoes a lot through black people when it's saying, why are black people or black youth killing themselves? That's just something black people don't do. And when I saw that comment, I said, okay, I see that comment too often, and I think it's high time that I actually spoke about it, and go into more depth. And I didn't know which way I was gonna take it or which way I was gonna go with it. So I actually, for the first time in a while, decided to pop open my iMovie app on my Mac and decided to make a video in this format, which is something I haven't done in so long. But I said I need to make it in this format so we can break down a little bit of what's going on in the black community as far as suicide goes. Now, as you can see right there on your screen, it says changes in youth suicide rates by race. Now, you probably really can't read it, but it says black children are actually, starting to climb up there as far as suicide rates and deaths amongst black youth. And I actually found this article that was from the Washington Post, and I'm going to read a little bit of it because it was posted on November 7th last month. So it's still very recent, it's still very new. And the part that stuck out to me was between 1993 and 2012, suicide amongst African American children across the United States nearly doubled. According to a study published in 2015, the steep rise amongst black children aged 5 to 11 from 1.36 to 2.54 per million children, even as it declined for white children, came as a shock to researchers. See, even researchers are stunned that this number is climbing because suicide has been known to be called a quote-unquote white people thing. But I think when we label it that, it can be just as detrimental and dangerous, because when you pass off something like this as just a white people thing, it kind of takes away from the problems and issues that a lot of black youth excuse me, face today. And not just even black youth, but black people in general, even black adults. And what I'm about to show you is exactly why I decided to make this video in this particular format. Something else that the article stated is, while suicide rates for blacks are among the lowest in the nation, when compared with whites, American Indians, Asians, and Pacific Islanders, suicide is the third leading cause of death for young black men ages 10 to 24, according to 2014 figures. Yet blacks are about as half as likely as their white counterparts to get mental health care. Now, I thought that was very interesting too, because a lot of black people do not believe in going to therapy or seeing a therapist, even though we have gone through so much things more than other people in this establishment throughout history, even today, where it warrants that we need to see a therapist or we need some kind of group therapy so we can find a way to get back on track. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a few examples of black people who have committed suicide. Some you may have heard of, some you probably are not familiar with. To be honest, I didn't know about some of these until I discovered them. Now, the first person that we should be all familiar with will be none other than Kalief Browder. As we all know, he is probably one of the most interesting cases as far as suicide goes, but it's not so much of him just merely committing suicide, it's what led up to him committing suicide. He was the young man in New York who was stopped. He was completely unarmed, and they allegedly said that he stole a backpack that had some electronic devices in it, which he did not have. He was sent to Rikers Island, as which we all know was one of the roughest prisons in not just the state of New York, but in the American prison industrial complex as a whole. He faced so much. I remember watching a documentary when they put it on BET that was produced by Jay-Z, and like damn near tearing up. Like, it was very hard to watch. It was I'm not sure, I think it was a 4 or 5 part series. It may have been 6, but it was a very good but sad documentary. He went through so much. He went in there at 16. He came out when he was like 21, if I'm not mistaken. So he spent some time in there. The system didn't do a damn thing for him. Let me just put it like that. They didn't comfort him at all. They basically dragged it along. A lot of legal things happened. He finally got out. He couldn't really grasp and deal with outside life anymore. He couldn't succumb to his stresses of life after that. And then he ultimately ended up taking his own life. And what's even more sad about it is that not long after he committed suicide, his mother died shortly after, because she couldn't deal with the stress of what was going on with her son. So all in all, that whole story was very, very sad. Next up, we have a young boy by the name of Carl Joseph Walker Hoover. Now, I can honestly say he's one of the few that I did not know about until I actually typed into Google black suicide amongst the youth or something to that effect, and a lot of these images started to come up, and his was one of the first ones that popped up. So I said, let me look in to see what his story was all about. But he was an 11-year-old boy. He played on his school's little league, well, his school's football team, and I guess one day he started making these comments and saying, you know, certain things, and kids would start to tease him and saying that he was making gay comments. So apparently they started attacking his sexuality. He couldn't deal with the stresses of life anymore, and then he ended up killing himself. So basically he was bullied. And that's another thing that a lot of people don't like to talk about, is the bullying effect that occurs amongst black youth, because they always tell black kids, especially young black boys, to just suck it up, move through life, move on. You'll be fine. Just be a boy and, you know, be a man or whatever, and things of that nature. But you never know or understand the psychological damages that something like this could have on young black boys growing up in this society, especially. You know, you never know what one is actually going through when they are trying to transition from boyhood to manhood. But, you know, another story that's very unfortunate, you know, a death by bullying, and who knows what his future could have been. Alright, now this suicide right here is an interesting one, because it's an example of wanting the world to experience your pain. But this one involves a young girl by the name of Nakia Bennett. She was from Miami, and she was 14 years old, and it said that she took her life overnight, and she broadcasted her suicide over a live stream. She stayed on the live stream for 2 hours, and then all of a sudden at the end of her live stream, she took her own life by hanging herself in her parents' her foster parents' bathroom of their home. This is very, very disturbing, but it's also very sad at the same time, because she was going through so much, but she decided that she wanted the world to see her pain. So, you know, a lot of people say when they commit suicide, they like to be alone and they don't like anyone else around when something like this is happening. But she wanted to broadcast her suicide to the world. She wanted the world to see that she was in pain. This is probably her cry for help, and realized that she couldn't receive any type of help, no kind of restitution. No one could help her. Like, she probably tried to reach out to many people, and many people probably brushed her off, or maybe it was a thing where people tried to get her help and she didn't want it. You never know what goes on inside the mind of a person who was going through so much like that. But again, yet another unfortunate tragedy. Okay, this particular story and incident involves a young girl by the name of Jasmine McClain, and it's a perfect example of when you don't have enough, or you feel like you are not with the in crowd, or you're not popular, what could happen when you allow it to get to you. But basically, she committed suicide because she was bullied, because she didn't have the latest trend. She didn't have the latest fashion. She probably wore maybe hand-me-down clothes, or she just didn't have it all. She wasn't like the other kids. And that's very, very sad and unfortunate, because we live in a very superficial society where it says you have to look a certain way and dress a certain way in order for someone to give you some kind of attention, or for somebody to love you. And that's so upsetting, because people are putting more effort into their look instead of self-loving them, you know, having self-love for themselves. And unfortunately, that looks like what this young girl succumbed to. Like, she did not, excuse me, I'm not going to sit here and say she didn't love herself. I'm very sure she did love herself, but maybe her parents just couldn't provide her with things that she wanted. So she probably felt that because the other kids had these things, and because she was bullied, that the only way she could become popular or have some type of friends was to look a certain way, and it just didn't work out in her favor. Unfortunately, it's what led to her taking her life. This next story right here, I remember vividly, and I remember they talked about this one for a while. This one is interesting because it involved not one but two people taking their lives. In this image, you have the picture of Marquise Brown and his girlfriend Mercedes Smith. So basically what happened with this one, I'm not sure, like, with some of the stories kind of fuzzy because it's like it was conflicting reports. But basically, she ended up one day, I guess she was going through some things, and it's so crazy because they were both 18. They're very young. And one day she was going through some things that she couldn't handle or couldn't come to grasp with, and she ended up taking her life. Now, what's so sad is that his is actually a really, really sad case too, because what ended up happening is people started to put the blame of her suicide onto him. They basically made it out to make him seem like he was the bad guy. He was the one that drove her to commit suicide, when I'm very sure that was not the case. He even put out a video. Excuse me. He put out a video, and all kind, like a write-up and everything about how he felt and all this kind of things. And some people was feeling bad. Some people were clowning him, and that's very unfortunate too. And he couldn't deal with the pressure and the pain of having to hear people say those things about him, and saying that he was the one that led to him killing his girlfriend. Well, not killing his girlfriend, but to his girlfriend killing herself. And then 2 days later, he ended up committing suicide himself. Just a very sad and unfortunate story. I did hear one thing. I'm not entirely sure. Y'all can correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments. Something about a pregnancy. I'm not entirely sure. I did hear that floating around. Like I said, it was a lot of conflicting reports when it came to this particular story. But I do know one thing, that this is sad. 2 lives lost in the same week over some, I'm very sure, something that could have been resolved had they been able to seek the proper help. This story right here is involving a young lady by the name of Laura Nassairu. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. I'd never heard of her or her particular story, but when I did get a chance to read over it, it is very sad. She was a student. I'm not sure exactly what university it was, but I do know she was a college student. And apparently, she has tried to commit suicide several times. Like, she literally just knew she was at the end of her rope. It was nothing more that could be done for her. She knew, like, anyone that tried to help her, it was a dead end. So what she ended up doing is she climbed to the top of a particular building on her university's campus, and she leaped off. And you pretty much know how it ended after that. Just a very sad story. Like, with that, it didn't really go into too much detail as to why she committed suicide. I don't think that she was bullied. When I was reading through, I didn't see that word pop up anywhere in the article, so maybe she just was done with life. Like, life was done with her. But either way, still sad. Now, every black person who grew up in the 90s or the early 2000s, more so the 90s like I did, should be very familiar with who this individual is. This is none other than Lee Thompson Young. I knew him more so for being on the show The Famous Jet Jackson, which was on the Disney Channel, and I think that was an amazing show. It showed the representation, of a black lead character on the Disney Channel playing a superhero. He was a famous actor by, like, pretty much by another life, and then he was just a regular kid, or trying to adjust to being a regular normal kid, offset. But then, he had a steady career after that, and then he ended up on the show called Rizzoli and Isles. Now, his death came as a huge shock because no one really knew what was going on. And a lot of people think that, oh, if you're a Hollywood figure, if you have money, you should not have any problems. And unfortunately, that's a very ignorant thing to say, because a lot of them, like Lee, has problems, especially out in Hollywood. I mean, a lot of stuff out there could be enough to drive you insane and want you to end up in an asylum. But basically, we never really knew what the motive to his death was. They just said one day, because they were still filming the series, and one day they were looking for him on set, that he didn't show up. They called his house. They kept calling and calling and calling, no answer. And then one day, then they had to end up sending, calling family members to go to his house. They went and knocked on his door. They saw his vehicle was there, but he wasn't there. So it was like, what's going on? They kept calling and calling until one time they just decided to call the police. The police had to break down his door. And then that's when they discovered his lifeless body in his room. So it's just like, real crazy, there was no suicide note left there. So we really did not know why he committed suicide. People just speculated that he probably was stressed out or was dealing with inner demons, but it's no concrete reason as to why he did why he committed suicide, because there was no evidence left as to, or any kind of clues left as to why he killed himself. We just knew it was just a huge loss, especially to people in the black community who grew up watching him on that show on the Disney Channel. But all in all, still a very sad story, and it still kind of like hurts, stings to this day, because when you grow up with certain people that you look at as a child and you see them go through and you see them float through life, and like, their life looks so good, nothing's going on, but you never know what's going on in their personal life. But he's an example of what a person goes through who's black and in this industry. Okay, this one is almost, like, I guess you could say, kind of echoes Lee Thompson Young, but in a very different way. But it also echoes another person that I recently did, when it talks about showing your suicide to the world. But this man's name was Jay Bowdy, and he was an aspiring actor, and he decided to get on live stream one day, and he stayed on there for an hour, and at the end of his live stream, he committed suicide by giving himself a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Like, he blew his head off right on and in the middle of his live stream in front of his viewing audience. And I'm sure that is something mind-blowing to see, but I know that's also psychologically damaging to the viewer. Like, imagine you standing right there and you seeing someone just blow their brains out right in front of you, or if someone else did it, like, committed murder and did the same type of thing. That has a long-lasting effect, not only on maybe the family, of course, but also on the people who watch that. That's not something that you get over easily, but it's still all in all a very sad thing, and likely we really don't know as to why he was doing it. Maybe because with him being an aspiring actor, he couldn't really cope with the stresses of what it was taking to be an aspiring actor, or what they call a struggling actor. It's not easy, especially if you're a black man or just black in general trying to break into that particular industry. But like I said, and with all the other ones, it's still sad and very unfortunate. Now, some of you may not be familiar with who this guy is, but some of you who've been on YouTube for quite some time, probably since almost the inception of YouTube, will know who this guy is. Now, he was around before I even really started making videos, and so I just used to, I subscribed to his channel because he had some funny videos and things of that nature, and I thought he was quite an interesting individual. And this is none other than Freddie E. Now, if you go and look him up, his videos are still online, and things of that nature. I think his channel is still there, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think they took his channel down, because he was a growing YouTuber. Like, he was really getting up there. He was like one of those original black YouTubers that was really blowing up at a time when it was mostly white YouTube was on there. And he basically committed suicide because of pretty much like a love triangle. So basically, he was in love with this girl, and basically, in so many words, the girl kind of double-crossed him and was cheating on him or whatever, or something to that effect. And he ended up killing himself. As a matter of fact, his last words was, "It's cold and I'd rather die alone." Puts finger around the trigger, and that's basically what he did. He blew himself away with a gun. Those were his last words, and he actually followed them. Whenever you see something like that, it's usually warning signs. And it's so crazy because a lot of women loved him and everything like that. He was like, wow, why did he do that? He was such a good-looking guy. Like, he could have had any girl he wanted, but that's not the point. He could have had any girl he wanted, but that was the girl he wanted, and he felt like he was betrayed. So it was almost like that Romeo and Juliet type of thing. if you remember that story, Romeo and Juliet, he killed himself, and then she killed herself. So it was like that kind of thing. But it's very, it's unfortunate. It's really not, something like that is not worth taking your life over. But it also shows right there that even though this guy could have had any girl that he wanted, he really only wanted that particular one. And I think, and hopefully I'm not getting this wrong, but I think he's probably struggled with actually solidifying excuse me, solidifying or holding down just having just one girl because of the lifestyle that he led or the preconceived notions that he was a ladies' man and could have any girl that he wanted. So that also plays a factor into it as well. But like I said, still sad. If y'all were on my old channel back when I first did this story, you heard me talk about this little boy by the name of Gabriel Tay. I've even mentioned him in a couple of other videos. He was the little boy that was bullied, and then a couple days later he ended up committing suicide. He was only 8 years old. Now, it doesn't really specify why as to why he was being bullied, but a few days before he committed suicide, and he hung himself, before he committed suicide, a video surveillance footage from security cameras actually showed him being bullied by these kids at his school. So you could actually go online and find the video of this little boy being bullied. And it's very hard to look at. Like, he's being pushed around, he's being kicked, he's being punched, and he's like defenseless because he's basically being jumped by these little brats. And it makes you wonder what goes through the mind of kids who do something like that, which end up leading to the death of somebody else who takes their own life. Like, imagine you as a parent having to hear that, and then as a parent having to witness what happened to your child leading up to that happening. That messes with you. Ashanti Davis, a very sad and unfortunate story. 10-year-old girl killed herself due to bullying. Goes back to something I've said when it involves black children, and when it comes to bullying, a lot of us are told that we need to deal with it, face with the bully head on. It'll be okay. If you need anything, just come to me. I'll tell you what to do if it keeps on going. But sometimes that's never enough. This girl has pretty much was at the end of her rope. I believe that she even tried to face her bullies head on, but it still was not enough. But I do give her kudos for being courageous to finally standing up to them. But unfortunately, it did not save her, because in her mind she was like, well, maybe let me take it another way. Say she faced her bullies finally after having to be tormented by them for so long. Maybe she felt that her committing suicide was a way of emancipating herself. Like, I've done what I felt I need to do. There's nothing left for me to do. Now I can just go. If she did feel that way, that's unfortunately not a good way to feel. But I see, if that was how she felt, I can see why. But at the same time, I really wish that she could have reached out to somebody, or maybe somebody could reach out to her. It's just crazy how you can be as young as these kids are and have the mindset that they have, dealing with these unfortunate events that go on with their life. It's just, it's really unfortunate, but it's just sad. Like, this has to be a discussion that we have with our kids, talking about like suicide, you know, the rates and whatnot, because it can no longer just be passed off as a white person thing or a white person phenomenon. If you want to talk about a white person phenomenon, there's plenty of opioid stories out there. That's a white person phenomenon. This suicide thing has been going on for so long. As a matter of fact, with all the stuff that black people have gone through in this establishment, I'm surprised that it's many of us still walking and not even having suicidal thoughts right about now. Shockingly, you'll be surprised that many black people probably do have suicidal thoughts. It could be your friend, it could be your spouse, it could be your mother, your father, your uncle, your aunt, your sister. Hell, it could even be you. So don't just sit there and pass it off as, oh, it's just a white people thing. Black people don't do these type of things. I just gave you plenty of examples. I could go forward and give you more, but I think by now you get the point. But I hope you did take away something with this video. Please share this with as many people as possible. And please do not ever forget the people in this video, because I'm very sure if they were alive and you were in their position, they wouldn't forget you.